Hello, and welcome to the Education module, Considerations for a High-Quality HEAR Application for the Human Health Exposure Analysis Resource Program, otherwise known as HEAR. This module is focused on critical parts involved in Step 2 of the overall application process, submitting your online initial application. A high-quality, clearly written application can facilitate a smoother process throughout the subsequent steps. Our objectives today are as follows: to learn about the critical components of a high-quality application, to learn how to avoid some of the common application pitfalls, to learn how to access additional resources to help you through the application process. This module is designed to help guide you to a successful application and to make the process as smooth as possible. On the right side of the slide, you will see an excerpt from the Annotated Example Application, a resource that is posted on the HEAR website. You will see excerpts from the example application occasionally as we go through the content of this module. As you complete the application, this is an additional resource that you might find helpful. Before we dive into the actual components of the application, let's review the HEAR program goals. You will want to keep these in mind as you complete your application, as alignment to the programmatic goals is an important part of the application. The first goal is to advance understanding of the impact of environmental exposures on human health throughout the life course. The second goal is to promote characterization of the totality of human environmental exposures, called the exposome. Again, these goals should be an underpinning to your proposed HEAR project. You'll want to ensure the proposed study you submit falls within the realm of the types of studies HEAR supports. HEAR provides services for the analysis of human and environmental samples from human health studies measuring environmental exposures. Priority is placed on applications with a focus on discovery, that is, untargeted analysis of the exposome, or hypothesis-driven research, utilizing targeted analyses with adequate power to address the indicated aims of the study. Pilot-scale studies are not appropriate for HEAR services. Inadequate preparation before you submit an application can result in lengthy delays during the review process, or even stop a project after it is approved. This slide provides tips on how to be fully informed before you start the HEAR application process. The How to Apply section of the HEAR public website, HEARprogram.org, provides information critical to the application and post-approval processes, including a description of HEAR research priorities, eligibility criteria, and HEAR policies for access to services. Please be sure to read this information to avoid major pitfalls of the application and post-approval processes. Some critical tips include: check on the availability of the samples you want to submit for analysis before you submit an application. Check the database and make a physical check of the samples and their storage locations. Note that if you cannot provide the number and/or volume of samples that were approved for HEAR analysis, your project may be stopped after it is approved. Make sure you can comply with the HEAR data submission and data sharing policies. Review the informed consent forms and the data sharing policies for your parent study. Talk with your IRB and the person or persons with the authority to commit to submission and sharing of project data. Confirm there are no barriers to submission and public sharing of all individual level de-identified project data required to address your project aims. Review the schedule and deadlines for application and post-approval processes. HEAR cannot guarantee services for projects with excessive delays. If you have questions or concerns about how to interpret HEAR policies for your application, please reach out to the Coordinating Center at hearhelp@westat.com. That's HHEAR help@westat.com for support. Also, please note that the links on this slide and all other slides during the presentation can be accessed via the links in this PowerPoint, which is available on the HEAR website. With all that in mind, today we will focus on 4 key elements of a high-quality application. First, an explanation of the significance and alignment of the project to HEAR goals. Second, inclusion of accurate information regarding study design, participants, and samples. Third, a scientific justification or rationale for each requested lab analysis. And fourth, a statistical analysis overview with power calculations for each aim. In the following sections, we will cover each of these more in depth. Let's begin with significance. A successful application will clearly demonstrate that the proposed study is consistent with HEAR research priorities. It adds or expands environmental exposure analyses for the parent study, and it advances the understanding of the role of environmental exposures in human health. So what does this mean? Your application should communicate what you want to accomplish, how it will be accomplished, and why it is important to the broader scientific community. We have a few tips for what you should include to successfully describe the scientific premise and significance of your proposed project. Begin with a description of the strengths and weaknesses of previously performed work, which is the basis of your proposal. Provide citations to support your premise. Clearly identify exposures, primary health outcomes, and any secondary outcomes for each of your study aims. Provide a justification for the proposed number of participants to be included for each aim and a scientific rationale for each requested lab analysis. Explain how the lab analysis results can be used to assess the relationship between the exposure and the health outcome for each specific aim. If you need assistance with this or any aspect of your application, contact the HEAR Coordinating Center for support. The second element of the application we would like to discuss is study design, participants, and samples. A common pitfall for completion of an application is ambiguous and inaccurate information about study design, study population, and biological and/or environmental samples for both the parent study and the proposed HEAR project. There is space in the application to provide information on all critical details. For the parent study, a successful application will include sufficient information about the parent study population, design, data, and sample collection to accurately inform understanding of your proposed HEAR project. For the proposed HEAR project, a successful application will include a clear description of the study design and accurate information about the participants, samples, exposure analyses, and outcome data to be included for each specific aim. As you complete each section of your HEAR project application, you should be providing the requested information with an explanation of its importance for each of your specific aims. We'd like to take a moment to draw your attention to an important table in your application. The purpose of this table is to provide information on the characteristics of participants and the associated biological samples that will be included for each of your requested laboratory analyses, and to provide a justification for how each analysis can be used to assess the relationship between the exposure and the health outcomes. We have a couple of specific tips to keep in mind while completing this table. First, if you have questions about which exposure analyses are appropriate for your study population and health outcomes, we strongly recommend you contact the HEAR Coordinating Center at hearhelp@westat.com to schedule a pre-submission consultation. During this type of consultation, scientists from HEAR Lab Hubs will discuss your study aim and respond to questions about your study design, available biological samples, and options for exposure analyses. Second, if you have questions about the suitability of your samples for a HEAR lab analysis, you can find information on preferred sample type and volume or mass for each HEAR lab analysis in the HEAR Available Analyses by Sample Matrix on HEARprogram.org. Third, be specific about how many samples you will be submitting for analysis. If you have participants with samples at multiple time points in the study, complete a separate row for each time point. If you have participants with multiple types of samples, complete a separate row for each type of sample. Fourth, take the time to confirm the accuracy of your information. And finally, please note that immediately following the table, there is an item requesting information for each type of biological sample to be analyzed for your project. Be thorough in your description. This information is critical to the evaluation of the feasibility of your HEAR project. For environmental samples, you will complete a chart similar to the one completed for biological samples. The environmental samples chart can be seen on the right side of the slide and is on page 16 of the application. For analysis of environmental samples, investigators are strongly encouraged to consult HEAR Lab Hub scientists to discuss proposed analyses and sample collection, processing, and storage requirements before submitting an application. Contact the HEAR Coordinating Center at hearhelp@westat.com to schedule a pre-submission consultation. The third element of a successful application is a clear explanation of the rationale for each requested lab analysis. This information is critical to the evaluation of your application and should be included in the biological sample and environmental sample tables for each requested analysis. You will need to include the scientific justification for each requested lab analysis and a description of how you will use the lab analysis result to assess the relationship between the exposure and health outcome for each specific aim. Finally, the fourth element of a high-quality application is a description of the covariate and outcome data, a statistical analysis plan, and power calculation. The information on outcome and covariate data is critical to the evaluation of your application. The Data Center will assess suitability of the methods for assessment and the degree of missingness of the data for achievement of your study aims. If you do not provide this information for all outcome and covariate data, or an explanation of why this information is not available, your application will be delayed in the review process. A successful application will include a summary description of the analysis strategy, as well as the statistical approach and power calculations for each aim. Additionally, you will need to consider and address the challenges and biases for each proposed analysis strategy. If you have questions about this process or need to schedule a pre-submission consultation call, you can reach out to the HEAR Coordinating Center. There are several important considerations for describing your statistical approach. Your statistical approaches should address each aim and include a clear description of the outcome variables and covariates that will be used in the analysis. As applicable, your description should address confounding, nonlinearity, mixtures, combined effect of multiple exposures, and potential interactions. Your description should also indicate how your statistical approach will be evaluated to ensure validity, generalizability, and interpretability. The power calculation is critical to the evaluation of your application. It should answer the question, do you have a sufficient number of samples to achieve your specific aims? Note that primary factors that affect power are significance level, sample size, variability in measured response variables, and the magnitude of the effect of the variable. If the power calculation does not justify the sample size, you must indicate a rationale for why the anticipated sample size is sufficient. In the last section of the statistical analysis plan, you should explain any aspects of the data that could present challenges or biases in the statistical analysis. These could include sample size, the number of covariates, incomplete repeated measures, missing data, or high dimensionality. Also note that examples and additional information can be found on pages 20 through 22 of the example application. Because it is so critical, we want to reiterate that you need to be sure that you or your collaborators have the authority to commit to the material transfer agreement and the data sharing documentation for samples and data from all involved sites and cohorts. Additionally, you should confirm that all of the project data needed to achieve the aims of your proposal is available to be submitted. If your project is approved and then you find you are unable to submit or share all required data, your project may be stopped. Do not expect that only experts in a specific field will be reviewing applications. HEAR review groups will include people with broad expertise in environmental epidemiology and exposure science, but who may not have a deep expertise in the particular field of an application. Write your specific aims, significance, and research strategy, including study design, methods, and procedures used to collect and analyze data, so that other scientists can evaluate your application. Be sure to take advantage of HEAR consultative services as needed. A pre-submission consultation can be requested by email at hearhelp@westat.com. In addition to the tips available in this module, there is an annotated example application available on the HEAR website. It provides an example of a successful HEAR application and is available as a supporting resource. The annotations in this document provide guidance and important considerations for submitting high-quality applications. Investigators are encouraged to review this document before submitting an initial application for HEAR services. Please note the link to the example application in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. As a reminder, there is additional information available on the HEAR website, such as research priorities, eligibility, and policies, each of which is linked on this slide. Good luck with your application, and we are here to help.